1 year ago, Kitten Space Agency was announced. Since then, the team at Studio Rocketworks made a lot of progress on what they themselves call a replacement for space simulation game legend Kerbal space program. How much progress? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Hello everybody and welcome! On October 31st, 2024, a post on the Kerbal Space Program subreddit showing off seamless transitions between deep space and the surface of the moon immediately gained a lot of attention. The KSP community was in a bad state at the time, since it was just a few months after development on the sequel Kerbal Space Program 2 had been shut down by publisher Take-Two, and the entire team at Studio Intercept Games had been laid off. The video posted by Rocketworks CEO Dean Hall gave hope for a future with a space simulation game that doesn't suffer from miserable performance, but more on that later. The accompanying post where Dean outlined what they had done, what they had achieved until that point, and who was on board with the project, also more on that later, reinforced that hope. Well, it's been a year and a lot has happened since then. Kitten Space Agency has turned from a pure tech demo into something vaguely playable, and the studio hasn't gone bankrupt yet. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at 12 things that happened in and around KSA during the past 12 months. And if you want to stay in the loop how the development of this game will shape up in the future, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because I will continue updating you, and I also have an interview with Dean Hall lined up, which will come out next week. Alright, let's start with probably the most significant item: performance. One of the biggest gripes with KSP2 was its lackluster performance. This was extremely disappointing for people coming from KSP, since everyone had asked the developers to focus on the game's performance even before the early access version was released to the public, including this guy.
Now let's get to my main gripe about KSP1, which is performance.
The initial video for KSA released on Reddit showed potential, a lot of it. And since the team at Rocketworks was not limited by the shortcomings of the Unity engine like KSP and KSP2, instead betting on a bespoke framework called Brutal, there was good reason to believe they could pull off the feat of delivering a game that's a lot smoother than the Kerbal games while still offering higher fidelity. Despite that hope, there was always the fear that the team could not execute on their promises. Well, since mid-August, I have had access to a pre-alpha version of Kitten Space Agency, and so far, it blows the games it aims to replace out of the water. On an older system with an RTX 2080, I can get a solid 60 frames per second, but only because that's the maximum the monitor of that PC can handle, and it even ran passable on my laptop with integrated graphics. Yes, it is still not a finished game, and we haven't seen it perform with multiple vessels or large part count vehicles. Although the developers have assured us this won't be a problem due to the different architecture compared to KSP. So we have to reserve our final judgment on performance for some time in the future. Speaking of vehicles and building them, let's talk about parts. Until a few months ago, KSA didn't have any vehicles, just placeholders. The developers focused on building the solar system and orbital mechanics framework first, which is of course the foundation for everything else. We now have 3 spacecraft inside the game: an Apollo command and service module and a Gemini capsule, both made out of just a single part. But since a little more than a week ago, there is now a 3rd vessel, completely made out of separate parts. If this sounds familiar to you, that's because I already made a video on that. You can watch that for more detailed information. If you follow what's going on in the KSA Discord server, you might have already seen that there were a lot of updates working towards this milestone. We got a glimpse of crew capsules, RCS thrusters, fuel tanks, and service modules. And if you sift through the version history of the released builds, there were already mentions of parts and subparts and converting the available vessels from the single-part implementation to using separate parts before they replaced the second Gemini vessel with the parts vessel. With a follow-up version, this vessel now got a fuel tank and engine, making it now a fully functional spacecraft to travel around the solar system. We also got a glimpse of a work-in-progress parts editor where you can modify and create parts out of a list of subparts. But again, I already talked about that in more detail in my last video. While still not finished, things are starting to look good. And speaking of looks, this leads me directly to eye candy. The KSA developers have declared that one of the pillars of the game is wonder. To achieve this sense of wonder, they want the game to look gorgeous, something that KSP2 had also aimed for.
The graphics have to be peerless.
We already have great lighting effects, realistic exhaust plumes for reaction control thrusters, we have cloud layers, we have ocean wave effects, and the terrain is also starting to get better and better. Just look at this comparison between the first video that was posted a year ago and how KSA presents itself today. If you have access to the KSA Discord server, you can regularly see new ideas and examples how the developers want to improve the visuals for the game further with each update. However, while it already looks nice, the clouds in Kitten Space Agency are still no match for the volumetric cloud mod that BlackRack made for the original KSP. I did an entire video on that, link is in the description. But I'm honestly not too worried about this current difference. I would assume that BlackRack will bring these improved clouds into KSA, since he is part of the KSA Team. Ever since the game was announced in October 2024, original KSP developers like JPL Repo, Harvester, and longtime KSP modders like BlackRack have been part of the team at Rocketworks. So while not a Kerbal space program sequel in name, there has always been this underlying continuity within the KSA team. But there are a lot of other veteran game developers at work, and the team also has a former SpaceX senior flight software engineer on board with GraphHook, and a master's PhD in SAC for computational science. For the past couple of months, modder Lynx joined the developers as well. He is responsible for the fantastic Parallax mod, which transforms KSP's planet surfaces from bland plains to beautiful, realistic-looking landscapes. Well, besides Eve. Eve is pure science fantasy. Lynx is largely responsible for the improvements in KSA's terrain graphics I mentioned earlier. And for parts, another well-known modder is hard at work. Daishi, who is known for his work on the KSP mod Universal Storage. Those parts I showed earlier were all done by him. Overall, I have learned that about 9 people are working directly on KSA, with other members of Rocketworks from the team working on the Brutal framework helping out whenever needed. More on that in my upcoming interview with Dean Hall next week. Based on the pedigree at work on KSA, I am confident that the game is in good hands. And so far, a lot has been already delivered. Yes, we are still far from a finished product, as I mentioned before, but all of these people are passionate about what they do and have a proven track record. Speaking of track record, or rather records in general, one thing that became immediately apparent from the start was that Rocketworks is betting on transparency. I mentioned this in previous videos, so this is just going to be a very quick reminder. The KSA team is very open about what they do and why they do it. We get regular development updates on their Discord server, there is a live changelog, and a pre-alpha build has already been released to a select group of people, with a wider public release planned in the near future. Maybe already when this video goes public, since I'm recording this a couple of days before release. Patreon subscribers and YouTube members have already seen it. Thanks for your support, guys. The way the KSA team goes about communication is in complete contrast to how it was handled for KSP2 during the reign of publisher Take-Two, where the developers were actively held back from speaking with the public, and the developer was even fired for answering a question about a feature he worked on without the communications team approving his answer first. This was shortly after the announcement trailer hit. A multiplayer developer replied to a comment, I believe on Reddit, and was fired because of it. For a supposedly indie game production, the corporate claw was clenching down on the KSP studio with an iron grip. And as we know, nothing good came of it. Transparent communication is a big difference to how KSP2 was handled. Another is the release schedule, because unlike KSP2, Kitten Space Agency is coming out with frequent updates. At the current pace of development, there is a new pre-alpha build for KSA available roughly 3 times per week. Talk about continuous delivery. Granted, We are still in the early days of development, and the pace might slow down over the course of the coming years while the game matures and integration might get more complex. But it is nice to see this constant stream of updates coming out and watching the game grow in a short amount of time. And while KSA is supposed to be a spiritual successor to KSP, there are a lot of differences already between the two games. One of these is maneuver planning. Getting from one planet to the next was a bit of a challenge in Kerbal Space Program without using mods. Fortunately, one of the first gameplay additions that was included inside KSA was a much improved maneuver planning system. Just select your desired target, let the game calculate the optimal transfer, create a burn plan for it, and you can even let the game perform the maneuver for you. In most cases, it will get you where you want to go a lot more hassle-free than the original KSP, even with the transfer planner that was included in one of the last feature updates. If you are familiar with KSP mods like Transfer Window Planner or MechJab, KSA will include some of their functionality right out of the box. To add to this item, something that helps with controlling your flight is the flexible UI. Pretty much from the start, KSA was developed with a user interface in mind that could adapt to the player's needs easily. Everything you see on this screen can be moved and resized. Another feature that is still on the horizon, because it is very buggy at the moment, is adding an additional camera. This would enable you to watch both your vessel as well as your target body, so you can fine-tune your approach and still have a nice visual of your spaceship and not the less interesting map view. What I personally am not a fan of is the current style of the gauges, which look to mirror the Apollo-era look of instrumentation. It's something that me and Dean Hall will talk about in the upcoming interview. What it boils down to is that the current UI is more of a proof of concept than what will be in the final game. Say what you will about KSP2's user interface, it managed to condense a lot of information in a small screen area and still remain legible. But whatever you might think about all of this, I'd say we need to wait on how the UI side of things is going to progress with KSA and how flexible it is going to be in the end. But let's talk about something else that's flexible and that has changed a lot over the course of the past 12 months. The titular heroes of the game, the Kittens! Cute critters in spacesuits. I guess we've seen this movie before, just in green, haven't we? Well, since the intellectual property rights for the Kerbals were sold off to a private equity company together with all the other assets of former publisher Private Division, there is no chance that the team at Rocketworks will ever have our favorite big-headed aliens in their game. Also, studio CEO Dean Hall is convinced that the downfall of KSP2 has devalued the property within the gaming industry at large and is not convinced that having Kerbals in his game would be beneficial. Over the past year, the Kittens went from rough sketches to concept art to a rather weird-looking first character model to what we have now. Actually cute characters that can already display emotions. We already talked about why the team decided to go with Kittens in my first interview with Dean almost a year ago. Basically, they are easier to do from a technical perspective than other types of characters. But we'll hear more about Rocketworks' reasoning in the upcoming interview. But while we're already talking about potential hot topics, let's talk about how the game is supposed to be distributed. Free with contributions. This is always something where people tend to predict the downfall of KSA. Why is that? Well, Rocketworks have decided to release the game not via known platforms like Steam or the Epic Games Store. Instead, they want to distribute it themselves, completely free of charge, and finance it with a still unknown contribution system. How exactly the latter will be different from donations or how Patreon works is a mystery at the time of recording. To everyone who is already starting to type something along the lines of "No Steam, then the game is dead," I have a counter-argument. There have been very successful PC games in the past before Steam was even a thing. It's probably an age thing, but I don't mind navigating the file system of an OS and find the executable of the game I want to play, or put a shortcut to it onto my desktop for quick access. And even after Steam came into the scene and basically became the monopoly for PC game distribution, there are still games that are successful outside of it. One of the more recent examples is the extraction shooter Escape from Tarkov. No, I don't play it, and yes, I have heard it has issues, but it is still very successful, with more than 100,000 active players per day. So there is precedent for games surviving outside of the Steam bubble. And you can still manually add KSA to your Steam library if you already are used to having all your games there. As for the contribution model, that's still a big question mark. From what I was able to glimpse from behind the scenes is that the preparations for rolling this out have been going on for quite some time. And who knows, maybe they will release it as a sort of anniversary present at the same time I release this video. Would be just my luck. Personally, I don't share Rocketworks' optimism that the game can be financed through these contributions. I kind of have the data to prove it. Looking at how many people watch my videos and comparing that with how many are willing to finance my channel via Patreon, huge thanks to you guys, by the way. It is clear to me that most of you watching are very reluctant to open your wallets when you can instead let your time be wasted by YouTube's ads or sponsor spots baked into videos. This is not specific to my channel, but is constant across all of YouTube. There are many how we make money videos from larger creators out there, and direct contributions are always a very small percentage of their income. If you are part of that small and willing percentage, a link to my Patreon is in the description, and I hugely appreciate your support. Alright, after that small look behind the scenes of financing stuff and collecting money, let's talk about something else the developers are currently already collecting. Industry feedback. On the so far private KSA download page, the game is labeled as Industry Pre-Alpha Preview. That is because Rocketworks didn't just provide the game to content creators like myself, but also to people working in the space industry. From what I've heard, those include actual rocket scientists, like maybe from NASA, and at private space companies. I mean, Rocketworks have a bona fide spaceflight software engineer on their team. I'm sure he still has a few contacts in the industry he can send the game to. The goal of the preview is to gather feedback and make sure the fundamentals are sound. That mainly includes orbital mechanics and spaceship behavior. Also, a couple of KSP modders have gotten access to the game as well, and some have already taken a stab at building small mods for it. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the content of the feedback all of these industry groups have so far provided to Rocketworks, but I hope it will make sure that there's going to be no Kraken. Right from the start, the KSA development team was confident that they will be able to avoid the most egregious issues that had plagued the Kerbal games. While KSP2 famously wanted to get rid of these persistent bugs that over time gained the moniker Kraken, and even openly declared so.
We're killing the Kraken. That is a hell of a claim to make.
In reality, they did not succeed with this because many of those Krakens were caused by how KSP and KSP2's underlying Unity game engine work. Since KSA is developed in-house from start to finish, the team can create the game how they actually need it to behave and not work around the shortcomings of an engine, and also without the overhead it comes with. Does that mean that KSA is fully bug-free? No, not at all. I myself found a couple of issues over the past months and reported them to the developers. One of them, for instance, is a huge drop in performance when going to maximum time warp, which kind of makes it frustrating to use when doing interplanetary missions. But since this is still pre-alpha, such things are to be expected. Bugs will occur, weird things will happen, and the developers will take care of it. As outlined above, the team working on this is kind of the all-stars of KSP development. They'll get it done. Alright, that was my 12-month retrospective for Kitten Space Agency since it was announced exactly 1 year ago. Have you been following the game's progress since then? When were you made aware of its existence? Let me know in the comments down below. While a lot has been done by the team, there are still many big items missing from KSA. We haven't seen any form of vehicle editor, we don't have any gameplay elements beside pick a destination and fly there. There is nothing to do on and around planets, and the titular kittens are still absent from the game at the time of recording. So you can be sure there's going to be a lot to talk about in the future when all of these things and more are going to be integrated. Therefore, I hope you also stay subscribed and continues to support the channel. As I mentioned, if you really like what I do here, you can support me over on Patreon, where I post all my videos free for a small monthly contribution. And if you go for the higher tiers, your name will show up here together with all of these wonderful people. I can't stress this enough. Thank you for your support. Speaking of support, do you support what the KSA developers are doing? Will you do so financially once you have the opportunity to do so? Also, what is the thing that impresses you the most about what the team has already accomplished? What are you still missing to dive into KSA once you will have the chance? Again, let me know in the comments, I really would like to know. Let's keep this conversation going and let's hope we can meet up in orbit one day.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.